All right. Let us talk about flow of the run. A few less people in attendance than I would have liked or expected. Anyone who's watching the VOD, thank you for at least watching the VODs. Why is flow of the run important? Or what even is flow of the run? You probably hear some focused people talking about this. Well, those are the questions we hope to answer today. Mostly it comes down to not missing anything, but also being in the right place at the right time and allowing yourself, the ability to get things done correctly. So here's my hopefully quick, no more than 2 hours, plus questions. But we'll see how we get on. So flow to run. Here's our agenda for today. We're going to talk about dancing, a little bit of the who, what, where, and why, objective prioritization, quest states, progression and leadership experience, build identity, efficiency, and timing. But ultimately, what the flow of a run is really about is awareness. It's interesting that Doku called out this term just before we started formally. And what you need to have awareness of all of these things that we're about to talk about. I would say in a focus group run, this is just it's kind of like on auto mode, right? Like everyone is sort of just doing their thing. We don't need to over communicate things. We communicate just the right amount. And everyone is looking on the left to see where everyone else is. When call outs are being made of like, hey, I'm going to do this objective, you do that objective, things like this, everyone holds that information and internalizes it. And someone in the chat mentioned like forming a bit of a hive mind. And that's where we want people to get to, where everyone has like a sort of almost like omnipotence, right? It's like perfect view, perfect knowledge about what's going on, about all of these aspects within a group run. But first, SPL, why are we talking about dancing? Well, first of all, not only do we have this banger Azaro quote, which fits in perfectly with what I wanted to talk about today, but also it's how I like to explain the flow of the run or group runs in PoE just in very basic terms. So I like to say that Path of Exile group speedruns are an extremely elaborate dance. You have people moving in different directions. Everything needs to be coordinated to the same sort of rhythm. There's lots of timings that you have to meet. And yeah, it's just like it should be all done in a very fluid way. And thank you, Azaro. He's telling us to entertain doubt is to dance with death. And what we don't want to be is doubting any of the information about the state of the run. So this is bringing us back to this concept of awareness. So we can break down the flow of the run into basically a who, what, when, where, and why structure. So who, and this is, we're talking about the players, who has good or bad experience. That informs us of who needs to be power farming, who's in a state where they're able to push content or do side content or set up trials, things like this. And then you have to layer on other information on top of that. So what are their builds, strengths, and power spikes? Are they currently in a power trough? What are the identities of those builds? Are they better at mobility, or are they better at damage, or are they more tanky, right? So different builds have these different things that they're good at or not as good at, and we'll go into that later. What objectives need to be completed? Like, what is currently being completed? What is coming next? And what you might have experienced in your runs. What have I missed? But, you know, we're not going to talk about that in terms of perfect runs, right? Basically, what's going on? What's going to come up? How can I plan for the future? And when do those things need to happen, right? So if someone's currently setting up an objective, in roughly how many seconds or minutes do I expect that objective to be set up? Do I have time to take a town trip now? Do I have time to make a new zone? For example, if someone says like, you know, going through the second fancy door at Piety in Act 3, then you have a sense of, you can sort of visualize where they might be. And you probably don't have enough time to set up a new docks instance. But what you could do is take a little bit of inefficient routing, but still kill a few more monsters. Because one thing you don't want to be is caught in a loading screen when a swirl is called, yeah? Where am I? Very good question. A lot of people should ask this in their daily lives. Where are other people? Where is the next objective? And where do I need to go next? Right? Again, this is part of planning, but also the awareness of where everyone is. That will help you with the understanding of what people are doing. For example, if I'm not sure who's running a particular objective that I'm aware that needs to be done, I'll check, is anyone in that zone? If not, and then if I'm on good XP, I could volunteer, or I can listen out for the leader who's coordinating people, to understand like where people are and where they should be going. Where do I need to go next is also really important. Act 2 is a great example of this, where we have a static methodology for optimal routing in terms of Act 2 swirling, right? So you don't need to wait for the leader to call out what portal is next, what objective is next. It's always Lab Trail, Fidelitas, double portal, then Weaver, then Creighton, then Oak, then Alira, while one person's progressing Val Ruins, and then you have the opportunity to take a Lab Trail if one's set up in a 6-player group, right? Like, this is static. You don't need someone to tell you that that's happening. If it's your portal that is the next portal, you need to immediately go into that portal. That is the thing that you need to do next. If it's not your portal, you need to wait for that person to walk into the portal to swirl to that player, right? Whether or not it's waiting for them to tag a bandit or to just go into Weaver so you can swirl to Weaver and not like figure out whose portal it is. So where do you need to go next if that's the case? Well, you probably need to go to a vendor, right? You probably need to empty some things in your inventory, buy a skill gem, things like this. Why? Why am I here? And this really helps us focus on what we're doing in any given moment. So like, why am I in docks? Kill monsters fast, get XP, get loot. Why am I, what's a super cringe zone? Why am I in Belly 2 in Act 4? Well, I need to get through this as fast as possible so I can get out of this act and then get into good farming zones, right? Why are they here? You know, if someone is like randomly coming into your zone, I mean, that shouldn't happen, but it can happen in a coordinated way. But why are they there? This is like another thing, like another layer to this. Who's doing what and where are they? And then why can't I swirl? Looking at lots of boot campers. Hopefully, with the flow to run, you'll never need to answer this question again, because you will know ahead of time what objectives are coming up, what quest states you need, and you will always have ability to someone as required. So let's just keep that one in mind. Okay, let's talk about objective prioritization and routing philosophy. You need to consider in Path of Exile speedrunning that progression is king, essentially, right? You always want to be making forward progression in a run, even if you need to simultaneously run other objectives. And part of this is, well, you're aiming to get through the campaign, right? That is the objective of the run is to progress through the campaign as fast as possible while meeting all of the requirements of character power to set you up for success in maps. So that's step 1. Step 2 is by making forward progression, you are giving access to the best farming zones to players who have the correct amount of experience for it. And that is going to help snowball your run. I'll give you an example. I've seen some groups in PoE, they get to Act 2, and they go, okay, we've got 3 people, everyone just go and do a thing, right? And then someone will go to Crypt Trial, someone will go to Way Forward, and someone will go to Creighton. Right? And then at the end of this, maybe one player is level 15. That player is ready to be in Northern Forest. Do you have access to Northern Forest? You do not. Why do you not have access to Northern Forest? Because you did not prioritize progression. So what we do in Act 2, and I'll refer everyone to the Act routing guide. I forget the name of the document. It's in the resources. It is critical that we prioritize the objectives that are required for progression. For example, in a 3-player run, what are those objectives? Well, we need Fidelitas's spike, or whatever it is, the gem, rather. We need Weaver's spike, and we need to open the roots, yeah? How do we open the roots? Well, it's in the same zone as Oak. So those are the 3 objectives that are blocking our quest state. In a 3-player run, we would then do Fidelitas plus the lab trial and the double portal setup. We would kill Weaver, then we would go to Oak. After Oak, we're opening the roots. Now what's blocking our progression? It's the ball. So one player needs to immediately run the ball, right? Even if we haven't done the other bandits, we haven't done the lab trial in Crypt, we need to maintain this idea of forward progression. Yeah? So, if we're maintaining forward progression with one player, we want to also have in mind that because we're playing in a group, we can complete many tasks at the same time. We do this through, obviously, portal chaining and swirling, as discussed in the Group Leveling 101. But you want to do this as long as it is practical, okay? And we'll get onto this a little bit later in the presentation. And practical in this sense means that, generally speaking, unless you're a very experienced group and you're making an active decision to sacrifice someone's experience, you need everyone to have appropriate experience values for the objectives that they're running. And if they don't, then they need to get into hard farming zones and just XP up really fast. How do you decide where to send people and which objectives they should be doing? Well, you need to play into build strengths and build power spikes. You also need to consider build power troughs and build weaknesses. I'll keep using Act 2 as an example. In Act 2, let's say you have a Venom Gyre player on your team, but this could be, I don't know, Ground Slam Marauder. These builds are extremely weak during Act 2. Whereas if you have like Fire Templar, Fire Witch, even probably bow build, these builds are pretty strong in Act 2. Like, you have a decent amount of character power, right? So when making the decision, if you have 2 players who are equal on XP on who's going to Weaver, you probably want to send the builds that are more capable of phasing Weaver and dealing with the ad phase. I can tell you right now that if I'm playing Venom Gyre, which is a Frostblades build, level 1 to 20, you literally don't do any single target damage. You send me to Weaver, you've lost like 5 minutes on the run. And I may like not even be able to face it. So you need to make smart and informed decisions based on a lot of this context. And then finally, and this brings us back to this concept of this big like dance, and we'll talk about rotational play a little bit more in the future, we also discussed it in the 101, is that you need to make space for runners to complete mandatory non-progression actions. So, the Act 2 example. The runner gets to the ball, they place the portal. They get through the ball, they get to the waypoint in Northern. In an ideal world, and very often in a 6-man, this should be the case if you have equal skill players, there will be at least one player who has similar XP to the main runner, who has also completed Wayford, Alira, all bandits, ideally picking up the lab trial, and picked up the A4, sorry, the Wayford skill point in Act 1, as well as having the Apex, right? So this is essentially all quests in Act 2 completed. One of these players should exist, and they should be able to swap with the runner. Then the person who progressed through the ball into Northern is then able to go back and pick up all of their remaining quests, which are not progression-based, right? The bandits become progression-based once you hit Cavern's waypoints, because obviously getting blocked by the door there unless you have the Apex. But yeah, you need to make space for people, and you need to play in a rotational way. Another example of this is in Act 6. For example, if you're running in Act 6, you would enter Act 6, run to the first fire boss, which drops the key to open the door, put down a portal. Everyone swells in, great. Then you run to the end of Tukahama's fortress while someone else is killing Tukahama. Swell on that player. Take the portal out. Take your portal. Go straight to running. You get all the way to Chevron. Okay, great. You're at Chevron. Someone's put the lab trial. Then the next chain is Chevron plus Lily. I would, personally, because I find I have the time, is take the lab trial and then swirl into Lily Quest. After that, I'm immediately going and pushing all the way to Southern Forest Waypoint. We then do the Southern Forest plus Fire plus Chaos boss chain. Then after Southern Forest, I'm pushing all the way to Beacon. Get to Beacon, I call in someone and we duo Beacon. At this point, someone is taking over to kill Brine King. And now I have the space to go and collect all of the rewards from the quests that we've completed during Act 6. I have not picked up any of the skill points, any of the respecs, any of the gems that I need from Lily, or the helmet, or potentially even the jewelry, like the belt from Tidal Island. But now, within the routing of the run, I've been given space after showing the urgency to immediately push to all of these objectives. Then someone's going to take over and give me that space to finish. And this is how you increase the speed of your runs as well. Okay, cool. Let's talk briefly about quest states. The main things you need to understand about quest states is ability, no ability, and remembering all of the steps that you need to complete. There's also like quest items, obviously, that you need to have. Sometimes these quest items, you need to be in the zone for them to be dropped. Sometimes they can be just on the floor. I don't have an exhaustive list of those. But yeah, it varies. You need to know which quest items you need for which quest states. If that quest state is a progression state, which is potentially blocking you from swirling, that's critical. And then all of this stuff can be tied into our concept of communication as well. You've probably all been sick and tired of hearing me blabber on about communication. I think it's the only time in this slide that I've written the word, so you'll be very proud of me. But yeah, like, you need to communicate quest states and ability, no ability. These are probably the two most critical things to communicate within a run, because ultimately, whilst it is nice to be able to be on XP and participate in the run, the thing that is actually a problem is if you don't have quest states to progress your quest state progression, where you can't swirl into an objective and now you're wasting everyone else's time and actively slowing down the run. If you're not able to keep up on experience, then that doesn't necessarily actively slow down the run if you're in an imbalanced skill run, okay? So something that everyone who's learning group speedrunning needs to make sure is, number one, progression is king. Number two, what are my quest states? what are the abilities that I need to have right now, and do I have them? Then number 3 is I need to communicate immediately if I do not have any quest states or abilities that I need. And then thinking about what quest items I need, or other things like this. And hopefully if there's a run leader, they'll be able to help you out, and you'll be able to fix this. Almost everything in PoE group running is fixable if it is actively communicated, yeah? And then I just wanted to mention briefly that there are some exceptions to ability no ability. For example, you have the ability to swirl to Apex in Act 2 if you don't have the Apex, right? So you can swirl in on the Oversoul if you don't have the Apex. And this is one of the things that is decently frequently missed in newer player runs, where you fight 3 bandits and you haven't picked up the Apex from town. Then the runner says, okay, swell for Oversoul. And you go, okay, I'll swell for Oversoul. And then you kill Oversoul and you come back to town and you try to get into the next act and you can't because the game doesn't actively block you from entering that zone. I think it's mostly because it was an old way of like defining the quest states, because it's Act 2. I think maybe someone can drop me a note if I'm wrong, but I think this is the main and only exception to having ability or no ability for being able to make progression. Okay, speaking of progression, you love to see it. Progression and leadership in runs needs to take on a leapfrog and rotational style. What does this mean? It means that no single person should have the main responsibility for these tasks over the course of a run. I'll give you an example. Usually what happens in focus runs is I will main lead for the first part of the run up until Act 6, or up until mid-Act 6, and then someone else from the run will take over main leading, because at that point, I'm very often main progression for the next few acts. The other thing is, in Act 9, if you have a carry who then groups up with a support, and they're farming BA and they need to communicate and coordinate, it's unideal for those players to have the responsibility of leading. They also can't be main running. So there's a few sort of rules here. I say leaders should also not be the person main running, because if you're main running, you want to be putting all of your effort and mental energy on progressing the run forward as fast as possible. If you're leading, you have to spend a lot of mental energy really making sure that you understand the flow of the run, what's going on, what's everyone doing, what's people's capabilities. And these things are extremely difficult to hold at the same time. I would say most focus members cannot successfully lead and progress at the same time. So this is not a skill that we're expecting of anyone, even within the focus environment, and it is not something that you should even try to execute on in general. Like, if the leader needs to main run, then someone else needs to step up who's in a farming zone to coordinate. Furthermore, you should be volunteering to do things. Like, the onus is on all players in the run to make the run succeed. This is part of what you can still contribute to the run, even if you're not necessarily the highest XP or the fastest player, right? So if the leader needs to go and push something, then you can step up and go, I'll coordinate the next act. I'll lead the next act. If the main runner needs to take time, you know how we spoke just before about giving the main runner space before they need to go back to progressing, space to get their skill points, fix gear, stuff like this, fix res, then you can go, I'll take over main running, I have good XP. You can volunteer for side content. For example, Act 6, there's two mini bosses in that chain, right? Like Fire Boss, Chaos Boss. I'll go to Fire Boss, I'll go to Chaos Boss. This is about having awareness of what needs to happen, yeah? And this takes the mental gymnastics a little bit away from the leader, who can go, okay, you know, SPL's got the Chaos Boss, I don't need to assign that. I just need to make sure that I assign someone for the Fire Boss. Or if SPL goes, I'm pushing this act at the start of Act 6, that means that the leader knows that they need to assign someone to take over at Brine King, but it just takes away a bit of the mental load from the leader there. So volunteering and taking ownership and responsibility within group runs is a huge part of how you make runs succeed, because it's like using this idea, and this hive mind analogy is quite nice actually, where everyone sort of understands what's going on to the point where you don't necessarily need someone calling out all the time, you do this, you go here, you do this other thing, because very frequently the people who are good on XP will self-assign those tasks, or they should self-assign those tasks, and the leader's role is simply to ensure that every task has been assigned, not that they necessarily need to actively check levels so much, because people should be checking their own levels and understanding level breakpoints and things like this. Okay, cool. Speaking of levels and experience, there are 3 states of experience. People who went to Eagle's lecture about how to farm efficiently should already know this, right? So you're either already on level, you're on track to be on level, and if you're not one of those 2 things, you are behind. When I say on level, I mean you already have the required XP for the next experience breakpoints, and we'll talk about experience breakpoints on the next slide. You need to be actively running or volunteering for jobs right now. As an example, it's Act 6, I'm level 43, we're not even in Southern Forest yet. So let's say we're just killing Chevron. I need to be actively volunteering and saying, I'll kill the Fire Boss, I'll kill the Chaos Boss, my XP is goods. If I'm on track to hit the next XP breakpoint, I can volunteer for jobs after that breakpoint, okay? So let's say I am 41.5 at Chevron. I'm on track to hit XP at 42 by the time we get to Southern. The next task after that is duo running Beacon and fighting Brine King, yeah? So what does that mean? I need to hit ideally 44, 44.5 by the time we enter Beacon, so I can hit 45 by the end of Brine King. So my job right now is I'm on track to hit those XP breakpoints. So I need to be power farming until we hit Beacon, after the quest chain, after the next quest chain. And I'm going to say right now or soon, I can fight Brine King, I will be good on XP. Behind on XP, you have one job, and it is kill mobs fast. You are slaughtering every white and blue pack that gets on your screen. Obviously not killing stragglers, not being inefficient. Review Eagle's VOD about that. You're not prioritizing rares. You're not prioritizing looting as much, depending on gear quality. But you need to get your XP up so you can get back on track to progress through these other states of experience and actively contribute to the run. Not to say that you can't contribute to the run if you're not on XP, because there are non-running activities that are still important. Things like farming loot, farming gear and currency and distributing that. You can also lead the run, so you're not out of the run and useless. Replacing portals is another great example, yeah? Doing quick jobs like running a quick lab trial, yeah? So like you're not out of the run by being behind on XP. You're not useless, but your main focus is trying to get back on XP, and you do that by killing mobs fast. So one really good example of XP breakpoints and having good understanding of this is that you need to leave docks at a minimum at level 25.5 if you wish to progress to Lunaris Piety. And that is the minimum XP breakpoints to hit end of act target XP. And what I mean by end of act target XP, that's being level 28 by the time either you have killed Dominus or the party has killed Dominus. Very likely, if you're progressing to Piety, you should have highest XP because you will have highest XP leaving docks. Then you will have likely the highest XP by the time it is time to progress to Dominus. So you have to do Piety plus Dominus. Dominus is a bit XP inefficient and can be rippy, and it is time consuming, the actual fight, right? So you need to make sure your XP is good before you start the fights, and 28 is the minimum level required to enter Aqueducts. So through experience and testing out leaving at 25 flats, basically you need to leave at 25.5 at docks, and this is just something that you need to know and be aware of. And if you're aware of those things, you can volunteer for tasks. So for example, if I am coming up to docks and I'm level 23.5, then I can say I'll farm docks, and usually farming docks means you're also fighting Piety. So your task is to find the docks item and get 25.5 as fast as possible, ideally before Solaris Waypoint is tagged. Alright, cool. Now let's get into details about XP breakpoints. I'm not going to read off this slide at all. This is just, everyone needs to read this, internalize it. These are essentially the appendices from that document I referenced earlier. You have a list of best farming zones, and you have a list of target minimum levels for ending the acts. And then I have written here 4 additional breakpoints, which are critical to understand, so that you never fall behind while group running. Okay, so step 1. If you have the XP required to enter the best farming zone, then you should enter that zone, assuming that the zone is available to you. Okay? Step 2. If you are efficiently killing monsters in that zone and not dying, that is the good farming zone for you to be in. For example, Chambers of Innocence level 35 is extra goods, right? Everyone loves a good chamber farm. However, if for some reason you have no damage and everything is slaughtering you, you get to the first pack and you fall over, you reset the zone, you get to the first pack and you fall over, this is not the right zone for you to be in. You need to go back to probably like slave pens, maybe control blocks. Worst case scenario, just go back to Calm Stronghold until you're like 37, or until after Innocence fight is done, yeah? So there's a bit of nuance here in terms of making sure that the zone is actually appropriate for your character's power level at any given time. The second part is understanding the minimum levels for ending acts. And these are mostly given by the first zone that you will need to enter at the end of the act. So one thing I've written here is Act 433, and that is Act 433 after Malachi kill, because you need to be 34 entering slave pens. If you're just 33 in a sense, you need to go really slowly and kill a lot. If you're 33 half or higher, then you can kind of blast Ascent and you'll get to slave pens at 34. If you're not 34 entering slave pens, it's extremely XP inefficient, okay? Okay, so let's continue. The additional breakpoints, and these are things that people will mess up, and it will just completely brick your run. Something that's happened a few times in this bootcamp already is trying to enter the sewers when you're not level 21. And usually this happens as you've had a bad Act 1 and or Act 2, and your XP is negatively snowballed to the point where you are level 21. Sorry, not level 21, so that means probably you're like less than 20.5. Very often I've seen people try to enter sewers at like 18 or 19, and you are extremely XP sacked if you do that. So I understand that there are busts to take there, but right now you're under XP. You need to farm XP and kill monsters fast So you go back to City of San until you hit 21, then you can go through the sewers portal. That's option 1, if you think you can hit sewers pretty fast. Option 2, let's say you're really behind, you're like 17, 18, yeah? Then what you do is you go through the sewers portal and open it up. Then you go back to your best farming zone. You farm. You just keep farming. You're going to get Battlefront waypoints. You keep farming. If you hit docks XP, that's fine. You need to have the awareness that you have forgotten, or not forgotten, but you have skipped the busts. Yeah? And what you can do is, let's say I'm really fast at farming. I'm really efficient in City of San. I even get back on XP by the time docks is opened. Okay? I go into docks. I pick docks item. I have Battlefront item. I go to Solaris. But I don't have sewers waypoint. What do? Well, that's fine. Because what's going to happen is everyone else has gone through sewers and taken the waypoint. So when someone goes into sewers, you swirl on them, make a new sewers instance, you open up the blockage, and now is the time where you can take your busts. Because you won't be the player who's responsible for pushing forward, because you're already behind and you need to catch up, okay? So this is how you deal with not being on XP for sewers. We already spoke about Act 3 leaving docks at 25.5, and by leaving docks at 25.5, I'm talking about actively pushing, right? Act 4, Calm Duresso, Belly of the Beast, level 32. Why is level 32 so special? Well, at every 16 character levels, you need to understand that you are getting one extra level of, I don't remember exactly what it's called, but like a grace range for how experience is calculated. If you want, you can look this up on the wiki, but basically it starts off with like within 3 levels until you start getting XP penalized. Then at level 16, I think it's 4 or something like that. Basically, every 16 levels, you're getting one extra level of grace range before you get XP penalized. Now, Calm Duresso Belly 1, if you go in at 31, you are not only one level lower, so you're getting extra XP penalty, but you're an extra level lower because you don't have the extra level of grace range. Safe zone, there you go. So it's 3 base and then 1 for every 16 player levels. Thank you, chat. So what we're talking about here is going, if I'm entering at level 31 versus level 32, that's basically the difference between entering at level 31 versus entering at level 33, right? So that's a crazy difference, and we can go into the exact stats on that in a second. Finally, for additional breakpoints, a lot of people ask, when can I leave Blood Aqueduct? And there's 2 answers here. The minimum requirements to leave Blood Aqueduct is Cruel Lab completed, so 2nd lab, and level 55. This is the absolute minimum for where you're going to hit level 58 at the end of Act 10. And why do I care about hitting level 58 at the end of Act 10, SPL? Excellent question. Because 58 is the absolute minimum level that you can enter maps before getting too heavily XP penalized. Even then, you're entering tier 1s, and you need to go slow to make sure you're hitting your XP as you level up. Okay, so minimum 55 leaving BA with Cruel Lab. If you leave exactly on 55, and if no one else in your party is 55 or close to, then either you're kind of doing a solo run in Act 9 or 10 by yourself, or you're heavily bricking everyone else's XP. So what you can do is wait a little bit, maybe you go like 56, 57, someone else hits 55, and then you can start progressing more actively. The latest I would want to stay in BA before progressing is level 58. If you leave BA at 58, plus lab obviously, you're going to end the run around 61, 62, and this is a very comfortable XP for entering maps. So these are your choices. Leave BA at 55 or 58, or somewhere in the middle. Being underleveled, don't do it. Just don't. Like, giving the example of docks. If I'm entering docks at 23, I'm getting base a 24.12% XP penalty. This is like a less multi on your XP, right? So entering at like, 23, it's already not even optimal, okay? But we do it because Docs is such a crazy zone. And by getting from 23, you get to 24, and then this number drops to only a couple of percent. But if I'm entering at 22, then I have a 50% XP penalty, which means we're dropping from 75% to 50%, which is a further 33% less XP than we were expecting. It's just basically a disaster. If you're entering, like, I would only ever enter Docs at 22 if I'm already like 95%. I'm just going to hit it quickly and I can move on with my life. And if I'm at the end of a previous farming zone, or if I'm not able to get appropriate XP in Battlefront on the way to Docs, okay? It is more efficient for your XP to do one full lap of City of Sun. If you're like 22.7 even, you'll get like 23 and a bit, then you can go into Docs. Really important. Here's our Calm Stronghold example. If I enter at 32, I'm getting 4% less XP. Totally fine. If I'm entering at 31, it's a huge 42% XP penalty. Like, that is so banned. You're basically out of the run for, I would call it at least 3 acts. If you're really good at XP and your team gives you the time, maybe 2 and a bit acts, right? An example of this, I think Brooks had to get sacked it was Act 10, like a league start or just a race or something, I don't remember. He entered Belly 1 at 30 and a half, or like basically just 31 maybe. And it took him until 30.8. Yeah, basically like just 31. And I think it took him until Act 7 and a bit until he was able to get on minimum XP for just being in the farming zones of the right area, and then a little bit longer until he could actively run again. And that is a very skilled player, obviously in a fast run. And now we're talking about, yeah, like at least those 3 acts, yeah, that you're going to be missing of being able to participate. And it snowballs a lot, especially once you get into later acts, because there's only 1, maybe sometimes 2 good farming zones per act. So you have to take multiple load screens to get into the zones that you need to be in. You just don't want to do it. Final example is BA. And 52 is 30% less, 51 is 50% less. Again, this is like kind of similar to Docs. We just enter BA 52 because it's so crazy, but 51 is just unacceptable. Okay. Build identity and strengths. What does the build excel at? Is it damage, mobility, defense, clear speed, combination? Are there other factors or vectors you want to consider? Generally speaking, you want a build to be good at a couple of these things. But let's just think about the examples of 3 main builds. Well, not main builds, but 3 build archetypes, or things that people commonly play. So, obviously, Armageddon Brand is very good damage. It's got decent mobility, decent defense, decent clear speed, but the build really excels in damage. So what is that build good at? Well, phased bosses. Things where, you have to deal a lot of single target damage within short spaces of time, and then you have to stay there and do it again, then again, then again, right? So sending your Armageddon brand player, especially if they're playing Cremation, to do act bosses or things like Innocence is going to speed up your run. If you send your Venom Jaya player to fight Innocence, or even worse, you send your Venom Jaya player to fight Dominus, they're going to struggle, and they're going to, lose your run a couple of minutes. We want to be sending builds to the appropriate content based on what the build is good at. What is the build's identity? Venomgyre is extremely good mobility build. Decent damage, pretty good clear speed, not good defenses, right? So what can you do with a mobility character? At the end of Act 4, at the start of Ascent, you can run from Ascent until Chamber of Innocence waypoint faster than any other build in the game. So that's what you send the Venomgyre player to do. The same thing in Act 6. At the start of Act 6 until all the way until before Brine King at Beacon, right? Like, no other build is going to match Venomgyre for mobility in those phases. Then let's think about Bone Zone. Good at defense, okay damage, mobility kinda mid, clear speed, like, also kinda mid. But, you know, who can fight porcupines in High Gardens better than Bone Zone? No one, right? So these are the sorts of things that we need to keep in mind about thinking how we're assigning characters. Another example from the chat here is Lightning Witch, right? So Lightning Witch is kind of like Armor Brand in that it has very strong DPS and okay clear, but it is extremely squishy and it has less mobility. So that's another build that you would consider sending on these bosses as being like the things that this build is inherently good at, yeah? But it's not only build identity and strength that we need to consider, it's also power spikes and power troughs. So when do the builds get damage upgrades? Do they need a critical mass of tree power? Does the build have any swaps or respecs? And are there any large traveling sections, or highways as we like to call them, where they're basically not clicking any power for a significant amount of time? Let's go back to our previous examples, Armageddon Brand, Venomgyre, and Bone Zone, okay? So Armageddon Brand, Firecrafts at level 24. You have a lot of power nodes that you're clicking pretty much the duration of the run. So there's not really required to have a critical mass of tree power. Does the build have any swaps or respecs? Well, there's the Armageddon and Creamer swap at level 28, so it's a bit clunky around that time. And then do you have any highways? Well, it depends on the version of the build you're playing. Are you intending to swap to a support? Well, you probably stop clicking tree power by around level 40, and then you're just taking highways. So you're not necessarily the best player to do things after that, but it's still possible. So then do you want to send the player immediately to do things at level 24? Well, ideally not. You want to give them space for doing their crafts. Do you want to send the player immediately to fight Dominus at level 28? Well, no. What we've actually done to find efficiencies here is have one player run up the tower, put a portal outside Dominus, then have the Armageddon Brand player during this time doing their swaps, get their 28 stuff set up. Maybe they've only done one Firecraft, they can do a second one at this time. Then they can swirl on basically to outside the Dominus fight, and they have full power for that fight. Let's talk about Venomgyre. Venomgyre must play not Venomgyre for the first 20 levels of the game. First 19 levels. So what do? You play Frostblades. Frostblades has like no single target damage, you can't fight a boss ever. Then you swap to Venomgyre, you're still very weapon dependent, you haven't hit a critical mass of tree power yet, and you've only just finished taking highways, so your build is like not really online yet. I found when I'm playing Venomgyre, my critical mass of tree power is once I have Tailwind from Lab, and then around level 32 to 34-ish, once I've clicked like all of the good nodes that allows my build to function really well. And after that, I'm just zooming. Like, worst case scenario, I can even fight bosses if I have decent weapons. Let's talk about Bone Zone. When does Bone Zone get the first big power spike? Usually they're kind of struggling on weapon upgrades, unless they find extremely good rare weapons, right? But the first big guaranteed weapon you can make is the 5 Whetstone craft at level 28 on a Gilded Axe. So you slap on your 4 Whetstones, and then you do a rare rustic recipe. And this Gilded Axe at level 28 is good to keep you until low level 40s. Yeah? Or like starts to fall off like late level 30s. So after 28, Bone Zone players, or not Bone Zone, but melee players generally, if they do this craft, are actually power spiked for a little while. But then if you're playing Bone Zone Marauder and you want to actually swap to Bone Zone at 42, you need to take time in town, you need to do your respecs, you need to buy your gems off Lily, things like this. So at that point, you're power troughed and you need time before you're able to act in the run again. So these are just some concepts that you need to consider. It's not only the strength of the build overall and what the build's good at, but is this a good timing point where that build has strength? Okay. Just going to change tack completely here and talk about efficiency. A big part of Flow the Run is making space for yourself to complete actions in such a way that you are the most efficient in terms of taking loading screens. Multiple loading screens gives you negative XP per hour. Step 1. Step 2, you never want to be caught inside a loading screen when you need to swirl somewhere else. Step 3, you also need to be able to make space for yourself in town to complete all of your required actions. Okay. So a lot of things people throw around, I mean, it's just, gospel at this point, for RPGs in general, or ARPGs in general, is town is lava, right? But is town lava? I would say it depends. And this is a big thing about Path of Exile speedrunning, especially group speedrunning, where you need flexibility. So, I'll give you an example. I'm level 24, I'm playing Armor Brand. Well, not Armor Brand, I'm playing Rolling Magma, intending to play Armor Brand. I'm at Doc's waypoints. I'm just farming. My job here is farming, right? Well, let's say even we've just done Solaris, right? So I have all of the components to open the blockage at sewers. Now I have a few options here. If I stick by this rule that town is lava, then I should go straight back into docks. If I understand that going to my hideout to craft, even if it's one singular craft, and then going back later on to craft again, even by taking these two load screens, I am increasing my farming efficiency, and I'm overcompensating for the time spent in town by having way more damage than my farming speed is increasing, right? So it's about smart and efficient use of town to increase your efficiency in game as well. So another thing of this is if you have a full inventory. Let's say you're really good on XP, and your job right now is not to push, your job is to farm. Your job is to set yourself up for success and set the team up for success in a later section of the run. But I'm full on inventory, so I can't pick up rares. Or in earlier acts, I can't pick up magic items to vendor for transmutes. Part of my job is to farm loot for the team here. But I can't because my inventory is full. A town trip here actually makes sense, assuming within the flow of the context of the rest of the run that I have time to do so. And what that's going to do is it will empty my inventory, and now I can pick up more loot. And I would say I probably make more town trips than a lot of people, but that's because I'm killing more monsters efficiently, which means that I am picking up more loot, which means if I want to pick up more loot, I need to have space for that. And this can be an idea that helps you have better gear quality and helps the team overall have better gear quality for the run. I'll give yet another example of Town as Lava. Act 2 is perfect for this, as Carla calls out in the chat here. So, if you're in town, and if you're in the middle of a quest chain, you need to make the most of your downtime. Because essentially you have forced downtime during this section of the run, right? Even if you go to a vendor, and I've forgotten the guy's name, but the armor vendor in Act 2, right? You talk to him briefly, you take Herald of Ash, or you take a Herald or Blood Rage or whatever, right? Like, even if you're just taking one gem, then you swirl into the next objective. After that objective, you sell half an inventory before the swirl call. Alright, fine, I've sold half my inventory. Then I'll take the next swirl. Then the next swirl's mine. Okay, I'm going to do my thing. Then I'll come back. And while I'm waiting for the next swirl to be called, I'm going to sell the second half of my inventory, right? So you have forced town times where it can be good to even do like half inventory or like staged vendors as long as you have a plan, right? You know what you want your inventory to look like at the end of this quest swirl chain, and you work towards that. Another example of making the most of swirl chain downtime is you could take a lab trial, or you could take another objective, because you don't necessarily have to swirl from town to an objective to town to an objective to town to an objective. You can swirl from town to an objective, and then swirl from that objective, or sorry, rather you can take a portal from town to an objective. Let's say in Act 2, if someone's setting up Oak, and if the lab trial is there, and if I'm ready, right, and the person is just walked into Oak portal, I have time to walk into the lab trial portal, click the lab trial. They will, during this time, call a party swirl after tag, and then I can swirl from the lab trial to Oak. And I've saved myself that time of taking the lab trial later because I've completed it now. Now, you have to have a deep understanding of what's going on to execute these type of portal takes, but they can be extremely efficient time saves. And I would say a lot of focus members and some trials do this very well. And this is something that you'll see us do, and that will increase our efficiency during these runs. Another really good example. If you have a bit of downtime in town and you're not sure what to do, you can open your inventory. Check out how much currency you have. Have a look at your gear quality. Do you have any items that need to change? Do you need sockets? Do you need to ask for currency or for help from other people? Use this time for planning. Like, be active with your downtime. Yeah? Then finally on this slide, I'd just like to talk about this idea of swirling once. And what do I mean by swirling once? It's to have this concept of certainty of action and intent of action. And this is where I see a lot of people, and this happened in a run earlier today, where I was giving information about the progression of innocence. And I said something like, it might have been like innocence ad phase, or it was like starting innocence, or something like this. Starting boss. Okay. And this was to communicate information to the team of my progression. The key word to listen for here is swirl SPL. That is the action required for when you need to swirl on SPL. And the player unfortunately swirled to me when I said starting boss, so my boss was 2-player tagged. Fortunately, I was playing Armageddon plus Creamer, so it didn't matter. But yeah, it cost them 2 loading screens, maybe even 3 loading screens, because what's the gameplay loop? I'm farming Innocence, and I swirl on the Innocence runner. I then have to, so that's 1 loading screen. Second loading screen is I have to swirl out of this instance into someone else's Innocence. The second loading screen. Third loading screen, I have to take that waypoint, and then I have to make my new zone again. So I've just taken 3 extra loading screens for no reason. It's an XP killer. When you also consider the opportunity cost of continuing to farm your Innocence until you get to the best blue packs at the end. So now I'm not even sure if that player had enough time to get through their entire Innocence to get to the blue packs at the end. Now, one example of swirl once Another example is things like, yeah, just making sure you're swirling to the right person. Sometimes the names can shuffle, um, and this happens where you accidentally swirl to the wrong person, and then you have to leave the instance and swirl to the correct person. Um, but yeah, swirling to the right person, for example, for bandits, you need to be inside the room to talk to the guy, right? Um, if Kitava in Act 5. If you're inside the room, usually the runner should portal inside the room after ability has been confirmed by all players. If you swirl to the wrong player, that player does not have a checkpoint in the zone. So you're going to get to the start of the zone, and you need to be inside the room to get the minus res penalty, yeah? So this is going to cost you multiple loading screens and then slow down the run. So swirling once is a lot about communication. It's a lot about awareness. But it's also just about making sure you know what it is you're doing, why you're doing it, and like making sure you're going to the right person's place and things like this. I actually forgot what this slide was about. Don't mind me. Oh, this is timing. All right, cool. I think this is our last slide before we also swirling on time and not taking 10 seconds. Yeah, that's true actually. Very true. Yeah, so we have this nice little quote from Azaro about timing and time. Again, our awareness of what's going on allows us to act within appropriate timings. But hopefully, like everything I've spoken about so far today, helps you understand that the timing in which you do things is also critical. An example of this is like, do I have the time to make a new instance before I'm expecting a swirl call to be made, so I'm not stuck in a loading screen? Do I have the time to do vendors here? Do I have the time to take a lab trial? Is this the right time for me to go to town to vendor? Is this the right time for me to ask about items? Like, you know, if we're in an extremely complex part of a swirl chain, now is not the right time to go, oh, by the way, I'm missing a 3 blue. Alternatively, if you're in the forbidden third lab window in Act 4, where there's this extremely complex chain of portals required to be set up, you know, you don't want to be saying like, oh, does anyone have an alteration for me? Or I still don't have my second weapon craft. But, you know, you shouldn't be in a position where you need a second weapon craft at the end of Act 4, right? So, like, timing is everything. And you need an awareness of all of the concepts that I've previously discussed to understand timing. And a lot of it comes with experience, and a lot of it's a feel thing. But yeah, just that I wanted to communicate that you need to have like this internalized feel of time. Okay, why don't I go back? Any questions? Raise your hand, put questions in the chat, come and talk to me. I'm not that intimidating. Come on, you're leaving me hanging here. I just talked for like an hour and there's not like a single question. Okay, so this is either a sign that I delivered a really horrible presentation or a really good presentation. Everyone's happy? Okay, I have a question. When's the next Act 10 run starting? Maybe someone can give me an answer. Now. Extremely based. Alright. Would it be better to say take blue portal? Yeah, no, take SPL portal. For sure. Always call out the name of the portal. Yeah, mentioning portal color is okay, but I would say only necessary if someone's struggling. Doku coming in hot with the questions that were answered during the presentation. When you're running at Act 6 after flag to beacon, what is the minimum level for the person to continue to Brine King? So you need to hit Brine King around level 45 because you need 45 to progress into the next act. So if you're being swirled into Beacon, you want to be 44 basically, ideally 44 and a half. But if you're at least 44, then you're getting good XP on Beacon, um, and that's going to give you 44 and a little bit, and then you'll pick up the rest of 44 to 45 on your way to Brine King. All right, I'm gonna give it 2 minutes for any more questions related specifically to Flow of the Run to come in. Um, Obviously, feel free to ask any non-Flow of the Run related questions. Um, but yeah, I'm just gonna be back in a couple of minutes. Um, After this, there's going to be a bit of a Venom Jaya Q&A. We'll probably drop down into. I mean, we can maybe just do it here. And that may or may not be recorded. If you're interested to um, hear about Venom Jaya stuff, that'll be in a few minutes, assuming no more questions. All right, be right back. All right. Well, I have no more questions on this topic, so I'm just going to end this recording. So anyone watching the VOD, thanks for sticking around for the last 3 minutes of things that are not related to this conversation. And I hope you're getting value out of the bootcamp. And go do some more practice. Yep.